Well, welcome to this series of videos which I've called RDWorks Learning Lab. Now, I've only called it that because I'm the one that's learning RDWorks. I'm creating this series of video instructions on how to use this software because the manual is basically a collection of English words that have been randomized and put down and called a manual. So I've certainly got no connection with RDWorks, and I'm certainly not a teacher, but I hope that what I'm going to show you here, which is basically based on my own experience that I'm learning as I go, because I've only recently acquired the machine, and if you've looked at my previous series of 6 videos about how to bring the machine into life, while I have played with this program very slightly, I only touched on it enough to be able to get my machine up and running and prove that it was a working machine. Now, to take it any further, I've got to do some work on this program to understand how it works and how to try and get the best out of the machine. I've got no idea how many there will be in this series or how long it will take, but we shall get the first few over fairly quickly, but then it will be a fairly long-term learning experience as I go. Well, let's get started with this first session. I'm going to tackle the simple tools, the drawing tools, down on this left-hand side here of the toolbar. But before we do that, there are a couple of important things that we must tackle. First of all, if you look at the screen at the moment, you'll see that it's probably nothing like the shape of your machine. And in fact, if we go up here to configuration, config, and we look at page setting, we shall find that the page is actually 1000 by 1000 millimeters. Now, I happen to know that my machine is 500 millimeters wide, which we'll reset here. 500, and the height of the page is only 300, and in the background we see a grid which is quite a coarse grid. So what I think I'll do is adjust the grid to something like about 10 millimeters, and we just make sure the grid is ticked, and that will do. Okay. The next thing you have to do is to establish where your machine 00 is. Now, there's a fair chance that when you press the reset button on your machine, the head will go over to this top left hand corner here, and that's where 00 really needs to be, because if it's not, then when we write our programs like this, everything will come out mirrored. So how do we fix this problem? Well, we come back up here to configuration, and we shall get to the system settings. And when we get to system settings, there's something here called x-axis mirror. So we need to mirror the x-axis by taking the x-axis mirror off, actually. And then we've got this little dot for position of the 0 for the laser head. I'm presuming that that should be over in that corner, but I'm not sure that it makes any difference. So anyway, that's how I've set my machine up, and we'll now do a close on that. Now we've configured our page, I'm going to take the simple precaution of doing a file save as, and I'm just going to save this as an RLD file, which is a drawing file, and I'm going to call it blank page, and I should just save that. Okay, so I can always come back and open this page up again without having to go through those setting routines, because I'm not sure how the configuration locks in, whether it's per session or what. And hey, we're nearly ready to start. I just want to mention this little green dot down in the corner here. I haven't quite worked out what it's to be, other than the fact that with broken Chinese it gives the impression that this is the Dakar coordinate 00, and the Dakar coordinates, as you're probably familiar with, if you're not, basically this is normally the y-axis up here with 0 at the bottom left hand corner, and this is the x-axis across the bottom with the 0 in the bottom left hand corner. So you'll find from time to time when we start drawing things, this green dot will jump around all over the page. Why? I haven't an idea at the moment, but it must be meaningful in some way. Let's not worry about it, because it doesn't seem to have affected anything that I've done so far. Right, well, now let's start off by taking a quick look at the tools down the left hand side here. Now, the top tool, when you click on it, is the tool that you're going to be using most of the time. This is your basic pointer. The second tool down, when we click on that, it's an edit node. And if we just click to the first pointer again, and I draw your attention to this blank space down below the toolbar, When I click on the edit node, you'll see we get some extra tools appear down here. Now if you go to the top there of that little menu, you've got a little set of arrows which if we drag those, if we do a click and drag that toolbar up, we can put it right beside, whoops, we can move it again and put it there, so that when we open up that node tool, all our node subtools are right beside it. So we need to go back and choose the main selection tool, and now we can go down to align. Now align is pretty straightforward. We're going to click on the page and we can click again, and there we have a line. Can't do a lot with it at the moment other than I can click on the line and I can put handles around it, which enables me to drag the line around on the center there. I can drag the line around. If I go onto the line itself, I can drag it around. Let's do that again, and with this time we'll bring the line in, we'll click and we'll drag out a line, and you can see that I can move the mouse around now by taking my left hand mouse, or lifting the left hand mouse button up so my finger is off of it, and I can drag it around where I want. Now if I hold my finger on the control key on the keyboard, look what happens. It no longer wobbles around, it only goes into the X or Y axis. So now something important you have to remember. You need to click to close the line before you let your finger off of the control key. And that will then lock it into a horizontal or a vertical position. Let's just leave that there for a second and move on to the next, what looks like a line tool. They call it a polygen or polygen, or to me it creates polygons, but basically it's a polyline. In that what I can do is click, 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 and it never stops. It just carries on and carries on. And if I want to produce a horizontal line, for instance, I can hold down the control key and I shall produce a horizontal line. Click. A vertical line, click. And then when I get back to the start point, if we watch what happens to the cursor as I approach that start point, it changes to something else. I can now click and it closes the figure. And at the same time you notice it's put handles on it. Now if I go back up to the main selection pointer again and click on the line, I can now move the center point around. I hold the line itself, click on the line, and I can drag the object around and the handles will go with it. So there's 2 or 3 ways to move the object. If I grab hold of a corner point, it stays directly proportioned. I don't have to change anything or hold anything extra down. It just stays in proportion and scales it up and down. Unlike the center ones which stretch it, this is all standard Windows handle technology. Right, let's skip this tool for a minute and let's do a rectangle tool. So here we've got a rectangle tool, which again we can click and bring a rectangle in, or if we hold the control key down and start moving the mouse around, we create a square. Now we must let go of the mouse button, the left mouse button, before we let go of the control key, otherwise it will turn back into a rectangle. Similarly, when we use the ellipse tool, we can drag in the ellipse tool and now click and hold it down, and as we drag it around it becomes any shape ellipse we require. If I hold the control key down, it turns into a circle. So if I want a circle, I must let go of the left mouse button and then let go of the control key. Now I'm just going to tackle the very quickly, we're going to bring in some text. I'll click on the text tool, and down here I'm going to click and I open up a box which gives me the font that I can use. It tells me the height of the letters that I'm going to use down here, and I'm going to set this one, just for example, I'm going to set this to 50. And then up here we've got text. Now I'm going to write a rather strange word in here, and we're going to say OK. Now you may or may not know the meaning of that word, depending on how familiar you are with vector graphics. Very briefly, all these lines, squares, circles, ellipses, they're all mathematical figures that are created in the background by the computer before they're drawn on the screen. When you do handwriting, for example a letter S, it's what they call a freehand curve. Now the computer has no means of producing an equation for a freehand curve. So back in the 1950s, the early 1950s, a French guy, and that's his name there, Bezier, created a way in which computers could sort of create freehand curves. So I'm now going to go to this curve tool and click on it, bring it into the work area somewhere, click, click, and lo and behold, we've got this strange looking straight line on here. So I'm now going to click on the normal selection tool and watch what happens to the line. It becomes a full-length line as I drew it. All the dotty bits have gone. Let's go to the edit node pointer underneath and we'll choose this add node. Somewhere on this line we'll click, double click actually, and look, we've added a node. So if I grab hold of that node and drag it, something strange will happen. I've produced some curves, which is the whole point of this. It's called a curve line. But I'm afraid this is not the place for me to try and explain Bezier curves. You're going to have to look the word Bezier up on Google and spend some hours in here fiddling around with Bezier curves. I'm just going to very quickly give you a brief look at what happens. You've got these levers here and you've got these handles on the end of the lever, and if I change the length of the lever, look what happens to the curve. It's sort of like magnetically attracted to the handle, and then as I move the handle around it changes the shape of the curve. And this one down here, it's got two handles on it, and if I drag that handle I can make it shorter. Oops. I can make that handle shorter or longer. And this one, grab it carefully. We're going to deal with accurately sizing and accurately positioning objects on the page. So let's just clear the screen for a minute. And we're going to do that by going back to the normal selection cursor, and I'm going to hold the mouse button down from the top left hand corner. Again, this is all standard Windows technology if you've done any of the drawing programs, but in case you haven't, you're dragging something here called a marquee, which puts a set of boxes that collects all these objects together and then allows me to press the delete key, and they've all gone in one stroke. I've joined them all together as one group. That's a very useful tool which we shall use later on. Let's quickly go back and draw another square. Control key, and we'll draw another circle. Control key, and we're now going to take a look up here at this top left hand corner where we've got some little windows with numbers in. If I use my standard selection cursor and click on the line itself, not the space in the middle, you'll see that I've put handles on the object. Now, as I indicated before, we can change these, and as we change these, let go, this horizontal dimension here and this vertical dimension here will change as well. But because we've set this up as a square, when we drag a corner handle, the shape remains proportionately correct. It remains locked. The same applies to the circle. We put handles on the circle. If we check the dimensions of this circle, it's about 55. We can drag a corner handle out and we can increase the size of the circle. Now let's go back to this again. if I change these dimensions, and I can do up here, look, if I go from the left, wipe across from the left to the right, that's a horizontal dimension, which I will change from 80 something, nearly 90, to 100. Now, watch what happens to the circle when I press that. Sorry, watch what happens to the rectangle when I press enter. It's now 100. I can do the same for the vertical dimension, and I want to get this back to a square. And unlike some Windows programs where you can grab hold of the corner, grab hold of a Control or Shift key, and it will automatically drop back into a square. Sorry, this one doesn't do any such thing. So Control Z will set me back to 100. Click, put the handles on it again. And I will change this other dimension to 100. And now we're back to 100 by 100. Now the reason why I've done this is to show you about this little padlock here. If we click the padlock closed now, and you'll notice that it was open before, and because it was open, it allowed me to change these dimensions independently. If I click them closed, then I've got a square here, and I will want to go back to say 50mm square. If I just put one of those dimensions back to 50mm square, because I've locked the proportions, the other dimension goes to 50 as well. Okay, now I can change it by a percentage in the same way as a dimension. So what are these other dimensions here, the X and Y? Well, let's just move this around to a different position. The red X in the middle has now changed to a different set of dimensions. So again, we can't lock these because they're independently set features, but what we can do is set that one to 100, and if you'll notice it's now go on to the 100 coordinate, and we'll set the other one, whoops, we'll set the other one to 100 as well, and so that center is now on coordinate 100 by 100. And that's what this XY is. It's the centers of the figures. Or the final thing I want to touch on in this session is this tool here, which is a rotation tool. Let's put the handles back on the square, and if I choose to make this square go, say, 30 degrees, it will go clockwise, and it'll actually go anti-clockwise, I believe. Yeah, it'll go anti-clockwise 30 degrees. So it certainly isn't the way that it's shown on that picture up there. And I think if I do a Control Z, I'll be able to get it back again to 0. If I put the handles on it, and this time I shall make it minus 30 degrees, it goes the other way. Now if you understand about the coordinate system, the Descartes coordinate system, that will make sense to you, because 3 o'clock is actually 0 degrees, and it goes round the clock backwards. It doesn't start at 12 o'clock and go clockwise. The principle is basically that this bottom axis is 0 angularly. This point in the bottom corner here is 0 degrees, a polar at the center of a circle, and it rotates back 90 degrees, and that's a positive 90 degree rotation. And so this is a negative 90 degree rotation, which is what I've just done there. I didn't invent the system, I'm just explaining it. So here we've got accurate angular control. But if we just want to randomly move things around, if we click on this square, double click on the square, click, click, the handles change into rotators. And we can move the object round in a random fashion wherever you like. And I say random fashion because we've got no idea what the angle is that we've moved it to. There's no indication anywhere. So be careful. If you want to move it accurately, you'll have to do it with this accurate positioning system up the top there. Today we're going to look at this set of tools across the top of the work area. Now these are for positioning and for alignment of objects. So first of all, let's drag in a rectangle. You'll notice that the coordinate, this green dot that I mentioned early on sticks to the top left-hand corner of our work area at the moment. It appears to be on the corner of this object. If I draw a little circle up here, it decides it doesn't like this square and it goes and sits up there, because that is the corner of whatever the work area is. When we first set the page up, we set up system settings, and there was something there which is called the laser head, and I think if I move that and close it, the reference dot moves to the other side. It begins to explain a little bit about what this green dot does. So go back and set it up to where we know that our head actually sits, which is over in this top left hand corner, and we'll say close. I guess that when we start doing some programming, we may well find this is the start point for the program over on the top left hand corner of our object. We'll have to wait and see, I don't know. So first let's put some handles on here to make sure that this is the object that we're telling the computer we're working with. And then we will go to this top left. Click on there as a tool. Nothing happens. You have to go to the line and click on the line, and it jumps to the top left hand corner as it says in the tool. Put handles back on here, and we'll go to bottom left hand corner. We need to click on the tool first and then go back to the object and click on the line, and there we go, it jumps around. Handles on the object, center of the page, touch the object, and there we go. I'm afraid there's nothing more complex in those tools than that, but you've just got to understand how to use them, the manner in which to use them. What their purpose is, I can't fully understand at the moment, but undoubtedly that may become obvious as we get further and further into understanding this program. For the next set of tools, which is this set across here, I'm going to draw another square, and I'm going to draw that as a big one. I want you to remember that the big rectangle was the second rectangle that I drew, because I'm going to choose one of these tools now. Briefly we mentioned something called a Marquee Tool in one of our earlier sessions. I'm going to use that Marquee Tool again. It's not something that you have to pick up, it's something that's automatically there. You just push down your left mouse button and drag it around, and you get this Marquee Tool. And as you can see, it doesn't just put handles on this object, it puts handles on a shape which encompasses both objects. That's because we're going to align these objects relative to each other. And what we're going to do, we're going to align left. Now remember, the second object was this big one, and this basically, the second object, is the magnet. So when I do this and click on either one of these objects now, it could be this one or this one, it doesn't matter, we've got a left alignment. The left hand side of this figure is aligned with the left hand side of the what I would call the magnetic figure, number 2. Same applies if I want to go to a right alignment. Again, let's put a marquee around it, and we will go right, and we'll click on any one of the figures, and it right aligns. We've got the handles on here already, so we can do a center alignment, and there we go, it's in the center. And if we do a center alignment the other way as well, we've got handles on the figure, so we don't need to put them on, and we click on either one of these figures, the small square moves, but the big square never moves because it's the magnet. Let's just put handles on this figure, grab hold of the center and move it away. Now as I show you, there's one way to draw handles around the figures, and that's to encompass them in one big marquee box, and we put handles around it, escape. Or there is an alternative way of selecting both these objects in a certain order, and that is by selecting the big one first and its handles go on. We'll now hold down the shift key and we'll click on the second one. Okay, we didn't see handles go on the second one, but what we've got a set of handles that encompasses both objects, so they're a group. But just remember that this time we clicked on the small rectangle as the second object. So we would expect the second object to be the magnetic object. Let's check it out again. So let's do a left align, click on this one, and sure enough, it's been attracted to the second object. Okay, now we've lost the handles on here, and you might be tempted, whoops, that's another thing that I will show you. You've got the wheel on your mouse will make the picture bigger and smaller. If you go to this corner of that small square and roll your wheel mouse wheel in and out, you'll go in and out on that corner. That's a useful feature until you want to get it back to a normal page, when you'll have to go to the middle of these 7 magnifying glasses and click restore the page. Okay, we got diverted there for a few seconds. At this moment we don't have handles on these 2 objects, and we could be tempted to do this. The order in which the objects were drawn hasn't changed. We drew the big square second, and so if I was to go to, for instance, to an alignment along the bottom edge and click on here, which one will move? The small one. If we want to make the big object magnetically attracted to the small object, we'll have to make the small object selected second. So we put the handles on the big object, shift key down and click on the small object. Okay, and now we'll do a bottom alignment, and this time you will see the big square move down to the small square. We've still got the handles on there, we haven't changed the handles, so we can try a center alignment. Okay, so we've lost the handles again, so we've got to restore the handles, and we'll put handles onto the big object first and the small object second, and now we'll do a center alignment the other way. Click. And I hope that fully explains all the quirks and the way in which you might be able to use the alignment tool. I mean, once you've got these 2 figures aligned and you want to move them both together, you draw your marquee around the outside and you drag this around. Or you can use this tool up here which says I want them up in the top left hand corner. Click. And they both go up to the top left hand corner. Okay, now this next set of tools up here was a bit puzzling to me to start with. I couldn't quite work out why you'd want them, but I'll give you an example where you might for some reason want them. Here we've got a rectangle. We'll draw another rectangle. We'll draw another rectangle down here, and we'll draw another rectangle in there. Now these 4 figures on the page, this was the last one that was drawn. So let's use this tool up the top here called the height tool. But before we do that, we have to tell it what it's going to apply to. So we're going to apply it to all 4 objects on the page, and we're going to choose this height tool. And it doesn't matter which one of these we click on, the answer will be, or the result will be the same. And I'm going to click on it, click. And actually what's happened is the outer 3 objects have turned into the same height as this master object, the last object we drew. Let's Control Z that to get it back to where it was. Right, let's marquee all of these objects again, and we'll choose this one, which is a size. Now we can click on any one of these objects. Remember, the last one drawn was this one, and hey presto, we've produced 3 clones. Let's do Control Z to get back, and this time we'll just marquee those. And we'll do the same thing again. Size, click, escape, Control Z, get us back to where we were. And this time what we'll do, we will marquee separately each one of these objects with a shift key. So we'll go click, we'll hold the shift key down now, and we'll click this one, and then we'll click this one, and then we'll click this one last. And I think you're going to guess what happens. They're all going to change into this shape. So it could be quite a useful tool if you want to size objects. Say for instance you randomly put a load of holes on a plate and you want them all to be the same size. Well, provided you size one of the holes, you can then use this tool to immediately make all the other holes exactly the same size. So that covers these 3 tools here. Can we remember which was the last object drawn? It was this one. Let's see what this tool does. Horizontal, across. Right, it happened very quickly, but did you see what's happened now? The gap between this object and this object is the same as the gap between this object and this object, is the same as the gap between this object and this object, horizontally. Let's do the same thing in the other direction. which is the vertical direction, click, and we can choose any one of these tools. It's not as obvious this time, but if we look here, this overlap here is the same as this overlap here, is the same as this overlap here. So here we've got some clearly overlapping objects. If I marquee all these together, I'll just point out that this is the last object that was drawn. And now we try this vertical down alignment tool and see what happens. Click on any one of them, and it's equally spaced here, here, and here. So again, there could be times when this is useful for laying out on the page, where you've randomly put objects on the page without any precision or accuracy, but you've put two pieces on the extremity of the page and you want the other two pieces to sit symmetrically in between. Well, the only other thing that I want to mention in this session is, let's just get rid of these, delete. They're all marqueed, so we'll just delete them. I'm going to put a rectangle up again, and the rectangle with its handles on has got its little red cross in the center. I want to mention this little checkerboard here beside the padlock. It's the XY dimension at the moment is at the center of the figure, because that's where the little cross is. So when I move this to 100 by 100, the center of the figure is on 100 by 100. If I move this to there, select position reference, OK. You'll notice something now, that it's no longer 100 100. In fact, the reference is up the corner here. So if I move that again to 100 by 100, you'll see it's the corner that's now moved to 100 by 100. So that could be of use to you. I tend to leave mine on the center position, but that's just a preference. There may be times when you want to move it around to something else, but that's what that little square does. So I think next time we shall get into some programming, now that we've got mastery of the drawing tools.